I'm John Mitchell. I'm Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning here at Stanford. I'm here with Cathy Koshland, my counterpart from Berkeley, to welcome you. So we hope you will enjoy the discussion over the next 24 hours or so. This is the fourth conference in a series. The first was organized by Harvard and MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts. 2 years ago, we were in Berkeley at a version of this organized by Stanford and Berkeley and nicely hosted on the Berkeley campus. Last year, we were back at Harvard and MIT, where it's easier to go back and forth between cocktails and dinner between the two campuses. Here we are at Stanford to avoid the Trans-Bay commute in the middle here. So this organization was a collaborative effort of the four institutions with help from many people. I hope you all look forward to a good open exchange of ideas. We have 9 sessions for participatory discussion tomorrow. So that's your chance, if not before, to state your opinion and listen to that of others. As I've stressed to my group in thinking about the year of activities we've had here, we may not all agree, but we can aim for acceptance and understanding of different perspectives. So that might be a good goal here. Like the previous conferences, this one will open with a conversation between the two university presidents. So let me briefly introduce John Hennessy, who many of you all know, and he's kind of telling me not to do that, but he probably does that all the time. So John is the 10th president of Stanford. He's been in that position since 2000. Previously here as a professor of computer science and electrical engineering, which is where I met him when I arrived another decade or maybe more before that. Prior to becoming president, as an electrical engineer, he seemed to follow a kind of version of Moore's Law. I think he was department chair in our department for about 18 months, and then he became dean for about 18 months, and then he became provost for about 18 months, and you could kind of draw the line that, and like his prediction that I remember him giving at a computer science faculty retreat, Moore's Law kind of tapered off there after that. He's been a tremendous leader. Some of his main accomplishments here include the founding of a number of interdisciplinary centers that bring Stanford faculty and students together to look at important problems in the world, and great support for the arts and the development of the arts district. He always brings a scholarly perspective to any discussion and a good sense of fun. Particularly related to this meeting, he realized more or less immediately the potential of technology in teaching and learning, and helped Stanford take some decisive steps to explore and learn about the medium. John will step down this fall. We wish him the best in whatever way he decides to change the world next. Cathy?
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, both as a Stanford alum in engineering and as a 30-year member of the Berkeley faculty. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you here and to help introduce these distinguished leaders in higher education. Nicholas Dirks is the 10th Chancellor of the University of California at Berkeley. He's an internationally renowned historian and anthropologist. He's well known for his commitment to and advocacy for accessible, high-quality undergraduate education in the liberal arts and sciences. He's also committed to the globalization of the university and to innovation across the disciplines in basic and applied fields. Before coming to Berkeley, he served as the executive president of arts and sciences and dean of the faculty at Columbia University, where in addition to a deep commitment to undergraduate education, he diversified the faculty and emphasized interdisciplinary and international initiatives. He's also served at Michigan and at Caltech, where he began his professorial career. He's had numerous honors. I'll note both our president and chancellor are fellows of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and both have won a number of distinguished awards. I just want to highlight that in the 4 years that Nick has been at Berkeley, he's had an unwavering commitment to access and excellence, and in particular, I would say access to excellence. Recognizing that public universities serve broadly the first generation of students coming to academia, and that those first generation low-income students deserve the very best quality of education that they're capable of obtaining. And that commitment of access to excellence, I think, is a hallmark of what Nick has done. So I'm going to let the two of them. John, you want to say something else?
Just to explain the format, we are here for a period of time to hear the discussion. After that, those of you who are here and registered for the conference, we will go upstairs for dinner. If you're not in that group, then we wish you a pleasant evening thereafter.
Well, welcome, Nick. Last time when we were up at Berkeley, you asked most of the questions and I opined first, so this time we'll swap it around, but this will be a conversation. We'll go for a little while, and then I think we'll open the floor, because I know we have a lot of people here who have a lot of experience with online technologies, and I think we'd be interested in hearing your perspective and your views. So let's start with a question which I'm sure many of us asked. MOOCs didn't overwhelm the world, and in particular didn't transform undergraduate residential education and put all the universities out of business rapidly. Some of us thought they might have a slightly bigger effect. Some of us probably even said the word tsunami maybe at one point. And we're still waiting. It could be a wave out in the middle of the ocean somewhere. But I'm interested in your perspective about why this technology didn't get as broadly adopted, especially undergraduate education. Let's focus on that for a minute. Why didn't it? Is it faculty resistance? Is it the value proposition? What do you think was the key driver here?
Well, first I want to just say it's great to be here, and great to have another conversation with John. We had this indeed at Berkeley last year, and I was able to also be present when Drew Faust and Raphael Rafe were conversing at the first of these conferences. So it's really terrific to be still with this wonderful partnership, exploring what all this wave stuff might mean. I wasn't going to raise the tsunami issue exactly, but I did think when I was driving down here that perhaps it's not a tsunami, but there are rising sea levels. We know that. There's clearly a sea change, and it's going to change the landscape of everything we do. So I think that you got us in the right medium. It's just not quite as dramatic. And of course, the reason for that is, I think, multiple. On the one hand, we may mistake one of the reasons that so many people want to come to college, whether it's Stanford or Berkeley or Harvard or MIT. They're not just coming for the courses. They're coming to be on the campus with fellow students who are going to be part of a network that will be lifelong. They come to be in the presence, and the literal presence of great faculty. And both of us have seen over the last whatever it was, how many years since you used that metaphor, applications growing at a just incredible rate. At Berkeley alone this year, we had more than 100,000 applications. And that despite the fact that periodically there's news about some budget issue or something at Berkeley. I don't know what they're talking about.
Minor.
But they want to be there. So, point number one, they want to be there. Point two, of course, is that it's not as if online hasn't already changed the way in which our students learn. And increasingly, and that's one of the wonderful things about our partnership with edX as well, Anant, how are you, is that we're learning more about how our students learn.
Right.
And in that sense, we both supplement and inform our pedagogy through online means. But we don't substitute it. And certainly, I don't think we will at campuses like ours. I mean, I think, there are experiments, the ASU experiment, for example, that will potentially open up a new pathway for students to go to some campuses. We know that there's increasing interest in summer courses that could help supplement the curricular preparedness of students. At Berkeley, as my colleague Vice Chancellor Koshland said in the introduction, we have a third of our students coming with Pell Grant eligibility. And that's a third of 26,000 students. That's a lot of students.
It is a lot.
What it also means, though, is a lot of them come without the background in their high schools that allows them to immediately hit the ground running when they get to Berkeley. So, in a way, extrapolating from what I think did become the basis on which some of these predictions were made about how MOOCs would change the world, the kind of Khan Academy kind of supplement, we've seen that online resources can be very important, even at the front end. But at the same time, they don't substitute for being there. And furthermore, I think the real point in relationship to certainly the mission we have at Berkeley is that these courses online, if it's just solely online instruction, you have to actually know how to learn in order to take advantage of it. So increasingly we see that they can work in parallel too. And of course, they are most spectacularly successful for students who have graduated.
Right.
Whether they're already in some kind of professional world, whether in the tech world where they need retraining, or whether, for example, and Dean Saxenian is here from our iSchool, at the Information School at Berkeley, who's introduced a new master's for information and data science online, exclusively online. And it's taking off. There's huge demand for it. It did, of course, require a lot of work to customize it. It's not just a MOOC. It's a very interactive, but it's an example of the kinds of ways in which online is transforming the pedagogical landscape, but not exactly as we first thought.
So this point about lifelong education of people who are already professionals operating in the field, that's probably where the greatest traction has occurred. Do you see, lots of things are happening right now, how those courses are being packaged up, whether they're going conventional degrees or other forms. Do you see that as a place that higher education, our institutions will do more in the future in terms of educating not just engineering, certainly, data science, you can think about business schools. Do you see that as a growing opportunity? And do you think it can, I don't think we need to make a lot of money from it, but it certainly probably needs to cover its costs, because those costs are, especially for Berkeley, which doesn't have nearly as much money as it needs from the state of California.
Where's the governor?
Yeah. I'll repeat it when he gets here.
Yeah, it's, we're not actually very good at making money. We know how to spend it, and we certainly need more of it. But I do think,
because you don't charge enough for your education.
Please, Governor, please come now. Could not have said it better myself.
Yes.
But the kind of way in which these new micro courses, nano degrees, very customized, modular kinds of online opportunities are being developed, I think can be inserted into a lot of places where we haven't yet thought about it. In terms of the obvious candidates in computer science, I mean, we do have huge demand at Berkeley for CS. So we put the lectures online for the students, and then we use as much as possible the availability that frees up for students to actually work with, to go and see professors and graduate student instructors and the like. So as we develop new again, modular kinds of opportunities, I think we're going to find ways in which they can be inserted without, may I use another word, without disrupting the fundamental principle of residential education. Because that, I think, is going to be not only enduring, but if anything, it's in a way become more attractive. I mean, it's a little bit like the TED Talk, which is put online almost as soon as it happens. And of course, the more it is seen online, the higher the price to be at an actual TED Talk is.
Right, surely.
And, so, I mean, but how do you see it here? But I mean, you've been, Stanford has obviously been leading the way in many respects in terms of thinking about everything from the MOOC and what Sebastian Thorne is doing.
I think we're trying lots of experiments. I believe this is a time of great experimentation, and that we haven't done nearly enough experiments to know how this technology works. I think we've done a few. There have been some controlled experiments that have been done that are pretty interesting, that's showing that flipped classrooms do at least as well as conventional classrooms and maybe actually make more efficient use of student time. I think we all realize in large lectures, there's a lot of wasted student time. It's on Facebook. It's not on paying attention to the lecture. So we can think about better ways to engage our students, I think, and I think that's critical. And building up the analytics that allow us to say the students are really learning, go beyond the anecdotal evidence. I think we have lots of anecdotal evidence where faculty will say, yes, I did it as a flipped classroom and my students did just as well as they did before. I'd like to have a little more solid numerical data to back that up. But I think we also see some things that are a little worrisome. I mean, you look at the one study that was done of an edX class where we found that the half-life of student attention was 6.5 minutes. This is the downside of having a highly technology focused group of students with short attention span, right? Who believe they are the world's best multitaskers. There was never a generation of multitaskers as good as these students. And I think we find that, in fact, they aren't very good at it. And when you chop it up into these short segments, you have to make sure you get students to really pay attention to the material. Otherwise, I think it doesn't work.
And it doesn't necessarily prepare them in general for the kinds of things they're going to have to do. But I think, again, how you can insert different kinds of opportunities and then how you build them and you make them cumulative and you understand better, even perhaps the fact that attention spans may be shorter than we would like, they can be directed.
Yes.
And they can actually be, like any exercise routine, made stronger. Or, in this case.
Well, I think it just says about the importance of active learning models, which I think we now understand are increasingly important in conventional lecture halls as well, right? And as we move more towards that, I think that will help. Bill Bowen has hypothesized that one of the advantages of the flipped classroom model is that you could lead the interactive session with something less than a regular tenure-line faculty member, perhaps a lecturer or a teaching fellow who's an advanced PhD student, and that may be one of the ways in which you can actually reduce the cost of education and help bend that curve a little bit. Do you think this is a model worth pursuing? I mean, it's not going to make a gigantic change. Maybe we're talking 20%, saving 20% on a course or something. Do you think this is a direction worth pursuing, or do you think it would be one that students wouldn't accept?
Well, to some extent, we are pursuing that at Berkeley because we have to. And we are actively exploring different kinds of appointments for instructors that will both make possible security of employment for terrific teachers who don't necessarily go through the research track.
Right.
But also make more accessible forms of instruction for the large numbers of students that we have. And as you know, we're growing that enrollment next year quite dramatically across the whole University of California. We're adding 5,000 undergraduates next year. That's like opening a new campus of another campus of the University of California.
5,000? So how many is Berkeley adding?
750?
750.
Sorry, you see, I know all the facts are at my fingertips.
That's what we'll add in about 7 or 8 years.
Well, indeed. I mean, when I was at Columbia, we spent 2 years planning to add 200 students to the whole 4 years, 4 classes. So it's dramatic. But that means we have to explore.
You have to do that.
These new kinds of models and options. What we need to preserve, however, is the reality that students can take smaller classes, seminar classes, with some of the top faculty. They have to have those experiences. It turns out that sometimes it's a single classroom experience that can be transformational.
Yes.
And somebody can have a seminar with a Nobel laureate, and they do at Berkeley, and the Nobel laureates teach more because they have parking on campus. And
I was told I got a special Berkeley parking permit once, and they said you can park anywhere you want, except not the space marked NL.
Indeed. That's right.
So one of the issues you alluded to was the importance of the role that particularly public institutions, but we all play in providing an avenue for students who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, who come from families that haven't gone to college, that are first generation. And there's been some interesting data that shows that the success of those students really does depend on personal motivation, on mentoring, on coaching, on real faculty interaction. And so I worry some about how do we use technology when we're dealing with students who probably have a much higher hurdle to overcome in order to succeed in your institution, in ours, and in other institutions. How do you think about that issue?
Well, all of our institutions, absolutely.
All of them,
I mean,
all of them.
You know,
it's a challenge
every
everywhere.
place, every place we think about in our universe of peer institutions is trying to diversify the student body in every possible way. But it is the case that some personal attention is required. And I think the notion that we can simply provide that through technology is, however much we might be wrong about the future capacity of robots and artificial intelligence and virtual reality, we know will, for a very long time, still require the presence of real people in real time. I think again, the complementarity here can be seen in ways, for example, that combine the power of a certain kind of online testing to show where it is that a student is stumbling, where it is a student needs help, where they can go so far, and then all of a sudden, it's pretty much like I felt when I was listening to Richard Feynman's lectures on physics, which were put on cassette tape. And when I became a dean, I thought I should learn something about physics. So my wife and I would listen to Feynman's lectures driving from New York to our place in the country. And at some point, there was an ant on a hot plate. And it was expressing the fundamental relationships around gravitational forces. And I was there, and I fell off. I lost my gravitational field.
Yeah.
And I knew it. I was aware. I was able to. But the point is that every student has that moment when they need some help. And so my hope would be that, in fact, these new kinds of technologies are going to help us intervene at the right places in the right ways, perhaps save time, but also be more helpful in the way in which we can provide that kind of direct pedagogical help.
Well, and if you think about what Sal Khan has tried to do with the Khan Academy, in many cases, in many districts, that's being used as auxiliary material, which I think is a terrific idea. It amplifies the power of the teacher rather than tries to replace the teacher. And given the different learning style that students have, some can learn from textbooks, some learn best in a live lecture, some can look at a video and comprehend the material. Especially, I think lots of young people like that video methodology as a way to learn material. So it's an
so it seems.
Yeah, it is an interesting approach. Do you also see this technology opening new ways in which we might help students learn? You can imagine that with the rise of machine learning and various other technologies, we might actually get a learning system that is adaptive, that actually can coach students, can diagnose errors that they make in online exercises. Do you see this coming? Do you think it's going to come soon? Would it make the technology more attractive if it came along?
Oh, I think definitely so. I mean, again, much of the conversation about online began just a few years ago, but the kind of progress that's been made in technological capacity and artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the like is extraordinary. I mean, you know this much better than me, but I think if you can get to the point where computers can not only win at chess but at Go, you're going to get to the point where you're going to have capabilities that we are just beginning to imagine. There's another side of it too, which I wanted to, if I may, turn the table and ask you a question about, because I was at Davos in January, and there were a number of panels and then displays on robotics and artificial intelligence and virtual reality, and there were some experiences that were available through headsets that we were wondering, as we experienced it, we were wondering how they could actually transform the capacity of students to feel as if they were somewhere where, even a video wouldn't take them, whether it's as in one of the examples that was available there, underwater,
Right.
under the ocean and
Right.
so on,
Right.
or whether it would be in some ways simulating the kinds of experiences you might have in a laboratory you can't actually access, or even in a field that is one of my own areas of concentration, some kind of ethnographic experience.
Yes, exactly.
Where you can experience cultural differences and orders that would immediately take you beyond where students perhaps could internalize the lessons from just the old narrative textbook. What do you think
I think there are
VR
great
is going to be?
opportunities there. I mean, you can create virtual reality circumstances that are simply astonishing.
Yeah.
I mean, people really think, I don't know if any of you have seen this experiment that one of our colleagues created where you put the VR headset on in a fully tracked room, and what you see is a plank across, and there's water on both sides, and believe me, you are scared to death as you walk across this plank because there are sharks in the water. So it's an interesting, and it's completely immersive.
Yeah.
I think they can be transformative. One of the other experiments they did was using VR to build empathy by having you meet somebody who you had to help, and then showing how this helped build empathy in people. I think the one thing we have to be very careful about is constructing deep, immersive experiences of high quality is incredibly expensive.
Yes.
It makes the creation of online courses look like a bargain.
Indeed.
So I can see this easily happening for games. I can see it happening with various kinds of avatar where the avatar will speak to you in some ways in very simple fashion. Doing this in a way that's really high quality and really gets across some key learning goals, I think that's not going to be trivial. And it's going to require us to work together in order to decide what those things are so that we can figure out a way to finance that kind of high quality
Well,
material.
indeed. And even the idea that the MOOC was just
just
taking
take
the video
thing,
of the classroom lecture,
Didn't
there would be
work.
it didn't work. And
Talking
as a
head on a
standard
video will put to sleep even more students than a bad lecturer. So it's a...
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. But it costs what, more than $100,000 for a standard MOOC?
Yeah, probably
And,
costs something.
and
By
then
the
it has
time
to
you
be
capture,
changed,
edit.
updated, and,
I mean, once we get better with the technology, I think a lot of this can be automated, how you do the editing, how you do various other things. The key will be getting this technology to work, and I think with machine learning, we can really do things. And it reminds me of a paper that one of my colleagues in the education school published a number of years ago, showing that one of the best measures of teacher effectiveness was the ability of a teacher to diagnose what was going wrong when a student couldn't master a math problem, for example, couldn't do subtraction, couldn't do borrowing and subtraction. The teacher who could get at what the student's misunderstanding was turned out to be one of the best teachers in terms of improving student outcomes. Now, you can imagine doing this with a machine learning system over time. And you can imagine even the magic of machine learning is that you get a way to do the programming essentially by running examples. And you can imagine building something which would really work well in this environment and increasingly doing more and more complicated and sophisticated things, because it doesn't need to understand calculus to understand how to discover patterns about what things people get wrong when they go to do a differentiation. So there's some real hope there. And as you pointed out, I mean, the amazing thing about AlphaGo is the way it made its final improvements was by playing another version of AlphaGo and learning from which strategy won in particular cases, which is really stunning. I mean, computer teaching computer, it's the end of it for all of us. So
So you think
good thing I'm
we're
older.
Get there?
Yeah, I think we will get there. I think that, the way in which chess was cracked was very different. It was brute force, basically. AlphaGo is not brute force. It's a very different.
No, it is a very different thing. But I will. Do we have to take questions from at this point? But
we could do that.
Again,
Make your last point, and then we'll.
Well,
take
the
some
last
questions.
point is just to go way back. There was a Hollywood movie that was made back in the 1980s called Real Genius. It was a terrible movie, but it was set at a place that was actually Caltech, which is where I was teaching at the time, and there was a scene where a kid was late for class, and he was running down the hallway. He heard the lecture. He knew he was late, and these were Caltech students, so they didn't like to be late for their physics classes. But he rushes to the classroom, about this size, and there is a reel-to-reel tape recorder giving the lecture on the front lectern. And at every desk, there's a cassette recorder. And we still haven't gotten there.
There we go. We haven't gotten there. We haven't gotten there. Okay, let's open up the floor for questions.
I'm Dror Saxberg. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Kaplan Inc.
Okay.
I'd love to hear your comments on how to get higher quality assessments of better learning outcomes into higher education. The validity and reliability and the work to actually build better quality assessments is well known, but is not a thing that a typical faculty member has done. Do you guys have a sense of whether there's group projects or ways to get better data about learning outcomes?
So the question is, how do we get better assessments of learning outcomes in higher education?
No, you first.
Oh. So, I think we're going to have to do this. We're going to have to figure out. So first of all, let me say, quoting from my colleague Candace Tilla here, learning is a complicated process. It's hard to understand. Students do it different ways. Really, it has to begin with getting some clear notion of what the learning outcomes are. And if I think about a course that I teach, I'm really trying to get students to have a fundamental understanding of the material so they can, when presented with a different problem but using the same conceptual material, they can go solve that problem. And I think lots of science and engineering looks exactly like doing that, and probably lots of other parts of our learning processes as well. It's a hard thing to assess. How do I run it? And particularly in an environment where if I put a final exam and give it to the students, 2 hours after the exam, that exam is online and available. The problems are available to everybody. So you can't reuse it in some way with a subsequent class to test it. I think we're going to have to think hard. We're probably going to have to supplement our faculty with some staff support if we're realistically going to ask them to do this.
Yeah, I'll respond in a slightly different register, but it's related, of course, to the question of how we can better assess our student progress, our student learning, but in fields that are actually the fields that I've spent my years in the classroom teaching. Typically, what I've done when I've taught is to require papers. Sometimes short papers every week or every 2 weeks, and sometimes one at the end of the midterm or at the midterm and one at the end. And quite frankly, as a teacher, one of the great difficulties has always been that you take the paper and you begin and you look at it and you want to respond to the craftsmanship. You want to respond to how students write, and you spend a lot of time worrying about the fact that they're not being clear. But the flip side of not being clear is that you're not actually aware always of what they've understood and what they haven't, or what is in fact a technical issue of really learning how to write. And also, of course, by the same token, having the time as an instructor when you're doing all the other things you're doing to give the feedback that's necessary. And it's not just in a freshman composition course, it's actually at every level.
Surely.
And you see skills develop, but you still see, and especially I think today, and especially with students who don't have a lot of writing experience in their high schools, this is a fundamental challenge. What I've always wanted is some set of technological supplements to dealing with grammatical issues, and we're getting there now.
Yeah, we will get there.
And that will be incredibly helpful, and it's not about style. It's actually about learning the craft of writing. And there's just not enough instructional person power to be able to intervene in ways that will be necessary for the scale of both the challenge of teaching and the numbers of students who need that kind of help without some help. And that's one of the areas where the so-called cost curve or cost disease, as Beaumont
No,
calls it.
I agree with you. I think
it can be addressed.
The only way I've ever been able to teach students how to write well is to coach them, and coach them in detail, and take a page they've written and rewrite it. So now, I can imagine eventually getting an ML system that would be good enough to do that. It's not going to get the ideas necessarily straight, but the semantics will be a little tough. Yeah. But we can get the syntax and probably even the logical flow of sentence structure right, and it'll be interesting to see. Another question. Now we got some.
Harrison Keller from UT Austin, Deputy to the President there. We've done a lot of course level redesign and sub-course level design. We haven't talked as much about program level design and what the residential experience should look like for undergraduates if we think 5 and 10 years out. So what do you think the most important differences should be if we look 5 and 10 years out at the program level? What we should be doing with the residential experience at research universities versus what we're doing now?
That's a great question. I think, again, each institution is somewhat different in terms of the challenges we have, and large public universities have particular challenges. At Berkeley, we guarantee all of our freshmen housing, and we've gotten to the point where about half of our sophomores have housing, but that's it. So it's a real challenge to think about how you integrate different kinds of how you take the residential experience of being at college and develop mechanisms where you can go beyond the classroom and actually have the opportunity to draw students in, to give them exposure to research, to involve them early on, particularly in their first couple of years, in things that at a place like Berkeley, often students wait until they've majored in a particular department or program to have the opportunity to do. So when I think about program design, or when I think about it, the kind of challenges and also opportunities with in a large public university where you have extraordinary research going on, and you want to find ways to get these students taking advantage of that research environment as quickly as possible. We have limits in terms of how we can use the dorms. We have limits in terms of how we can use the classroom. We have limits in terms of how many advisors and mentors and student support staff we can deploy. And so in that respect, I think there are huge opportunities for technology to begin to help, to begin to make the realities of research that's going on right there in the campus, but which you can't necessarily access right away, available. And I think for us anyway, as we think about the future, we're trying to think about how to make sure students come and hit the ground running, whatever their background is,
right,
and immediately see that this is different. It's not a liberal arts college, neither is Stanford. I mean,
right,
that's. But it's a place where this research isn't just going on somewhere else.
Yes.
I mean, that, again, it doesn't respond to exactly your question, but it is what we are thinking about a lot at Berkeley, how to make that research environment palpable very early on. That conveys then an excitement about being there. That, I mean, it's how we talk about Berkeley. It's a research university, not just that faculty are doing research or graduate students are getting trained. It's also that undergraduates have an opportunity to participate in it. But it is a challenge when you have 27,000 undergraduates.
It is. It's an interesting question because we ran a course last year at the D School that David Kelly ran, reconceptualizing education in 2040 or something. And I thought that one of the most interesting ideas was that students might take 6 or 8 or 10 years to complete a 4-year course of study, cycling in, going out and working for a while and then coming back. And it's a management issue because you're now going to have to manage those students and somehow balance the class. And whether or not students would really do it, or whether class identity and the relationship with their friends, particularly because we house our students for all 4 years, is so strong that they're not going to want to break that bond somehow. But I think it's a fascinating idea, rethinking how we integrate work experience, maybe community service experience, into a 4-year education in a different way, and worth exploring.
I mean, that very issue, though, raises the question of how you customize when you have so many different kinds of students.
Agreed.
And
in an efficient way. I mean, so it's not.
And also they do want to be there.
They do want to be there.
I mean, they want to be here and they want to be there. We have low numbers of study abroad in part, and we ask them why, and they say, well, I like it here.
Yeah.
Why don't we take Ike over here and then Brian in the front there, and then that may bring us to our end here. Ike?
So Ike Chuang from MIT. The promise of machine learning is predicated on the availability of data, especially high-quality data that you can train AlphaGo and so forth on. In our efforts at MIT with MITx data and millions of students, we've found that the quality of data is extremely poor in the MOOCs. Really what one needs is residential data. And I was incredibly impressed to learn from John Mitchell earlier today that Stanford's registrar released all of the student data for 15 years to a
So much for FERPA.
I was going to say. How'd you do that?
So much for informal conversation among colleagues. That didn't really happen. We have the Carta project that you know about, and it's carefully supervised.
Okay, good. Anonymized.
That was fantastic, the audacity of Stanford to do that and to lead and show us the way where we might get the high quality data of a curated environment. So the question to you is this the time to revisit policies about data sharing and FERPA and the restrictions, and how can we go about this so that we can make machine learning a possibility and a plausibility for education improvement?
Certainly I think it is, and given the rise of big data and some of the experiments that are being done, not only in the context of the university, but in the context of using census data and IRS data and various other things, where we're looking at outcomes and the work that Roz Chetty is doing, for example. Imagine that work, which focuses currently on cities and where young people go to K-12, but now imagine extending that to higher education. It's going to happen, and I think we'll learn a lot of interesting things. I think we'll learn that higher education is an even bigger economic multiplier than we even ever imagined. But I think we can do the same thing internally. We should be able to make that data. We should be able to anonymize it in a way that there isn't a FERPA issue around the data, and we should share it, because I think the key point is ML works when you have lots and lots of data to run it through, and it doesn't work when you don't have lots of high-quality data. It will tell you anything you want to know, including something that makes no sense at all. Garbage in, garbage out. It's the ultimate system for that. So,
but we do have to. I mean, FERPA, we're not throwing FERPA out. We do have to be able to protect our students when they're...
Not as long as there's any representatives from the Department of Education here. Okay, John, who was next?
Brian Murphy has the mic there.
It's Brian Murphy from De Anza College. I'm going to raise a question which obviously impacts and has significance for the University of California differently than it would for Harvard or MIT or Stanford. A third of your graduates are transfers from the California community colleges. Half of the CSU's graduates are from the California community colleges. What we're picking up at Foothill and De Anza is a profound, deep desire for person-to-person presence, the importance of our physical campuses, just what you've been talking about. And they build communities of incredible depth and significance, and then they atomize as they head to you. And they report back not just fear and alienation, but real loneliness in terms of what it means to enter a residential environment without being residential, having been in a community of some depth, in most cases well beyond 2 years, because they're coming to us with significant needs for language arts and mathematics instruction. So I'm just asking if you could reflect a bit on the way in which this conversation shifts when you think about that transfer function, which is at the heart of what we do in the public institutions in California.
Oh, it's a terrific question, and it is one of the really important accomplishments of the University of California in relationship to the community colleges and CSUs, the master plan, which did encode this expectation that even a place like Berkeley would take approximately a third of our students from transfer students. We're a little bit lower than that, but not much. And of course, everything you say is correct. Students come. It's more difficult to become integrated into the life of the campus. What I was talking about before in terms of the problems of socialization and making opportunities available from the first months on for students coming for a 4-year experience is just exponentially more difficult when you have a transfer population who comes for this residential experience, which of course does not include for them going to live in a dorm. It doesn't include for them having the broad range of classes that you take for breadth. It's often very, very focused. Of course, it's often not only just focused in curricular terms, but it's focused in terms of the time that people have because many of them are working to support themselves through those years. And of course, there's a higher proportion of low-income students in the transfer population, as you know. So I think what we always have to keep in mind, however utopian we might feel about the capabilities of machine learning, et cetera, is that the residential experience is not just about being there in the sense of going to a class and being on a campus. It's about finding ways to create community.
Yeah.
And to create community beyond just the local groups that tend to become the foci for affiliation in some of the student associations that tend to take certain groups and keep them in some sense less exposed to the wider community of students than would be best for the institution and best for the students. So it is indeed something that we think a lot about. And ultimately, it is at the root of what the opportunity, if I can just put this in broader terms, what the opportunity of the University of California represents, why it is so important for the state, why it's so important for the nation, that we support the kind of enterprise that's represented by not just Berkeley, but by all the UCs, where you can have the finest research universities in the world made available to students who will spend their first years in a community college and never have dreamed of coming to a place like the institution I'm honored to lead. Of course, again, even the kinds of claims that were made about MOOCs as democratizing will never finally compete with the democratization that is made real by institutions like the University of California, which the New York Times, in its study last fall, came out and said it's the greatest social mobility engine anywhere in America. So I think what you're saying is just so important, but for our transfer population and for the institutions that we're interconnected with through the master plan and through our efforts to keep that alive, even in a very difficult funding environment, is so important for us to keep at the forefront of our attention as educators.
I agree 100%.
You want to take one more question?
We can take one more.
With all the proliferation of online technologies and online learning, I wanted to know what your thoughts were about engaging alumni intellectually with online technologies and what your thoughts were on that as a way to foster alumni giving rates and giving back to the school through volunteerism and so forth. What are your thoughts about that area of online learning?
So we've done some experiments on this. I think it's safe to say that there's a lot of content out there. There's a lot of content. If you're going to spend a lot of money to produce high quality content so that you're competing with the PBSs and the Learning Company and various others, you can probably get alumni traction. What you probably won't get is for them to help reimburse the costs of it very much. We found the only place we could get significant alumni traction when they were really paying for the costs of those particular courses was when the course was either very topical. We did a course on Iraq as the Iraq War was beginning. 8-week course, that got a lot of attention. Or the course has a hands-on piece. So we have a creative writing course where the students actually take it online, but then have a coach who reviews their writing and gives them feedback. That's not an inexpensive course. You're going to have to generate revenue for that. I think we didn't find a lot of interest in courses that didn't have a lot of production value and were not tuned to the time in which people occur. Career level courses, absolutely lots in that level. But that's just an indication. I mean, there are obviously, as you pointed to, secondary benefits in terms of alumni connection and interaction. But I don't think they're going to compete with, for example, a reunion where people are on campus, where they're with their friends, when they've got the faculty members standing in front of the course of 30 or 40. That's a much more compelling opportunity for alumni.
Indeed, and once again, it points to the enduring importance of being there, of residential experience, and in this case, of actually getting together as communities and and maintaining connections with the people who are part of the institution. But I will say one thing. I think it's important. It may be in this vein interesting to note that the most popular course we put online through edX is Dr. Keltner's course called The Science of Happiness. And maybe we should make a special deal for our alums. What do you say?
That's right. Good.
All right. Well, on the theme of being there or
being happy
here and being happy, thank you very much for all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.